Welcome to Lawyers Coach. My name is Oliver Hansard, and each episode of this podcast will feature myself or Claire Rayson, both of us coaches and former lawyers, trying to find out what makes lawyers tick. We'll be hearing from various guests and experts, and then at the end of each episode, we will both be reflecting on what they said. In this episode, Claire Rayson talks to Ben White, the founder of the Crafty Counsel, a community for in-house lawyers. Claire and Ben have a wide-ranging conversation and talk about, amongst other things, the need for more tech in law firms, how 2020 may have witnessed the transition from lawyers being just risk managers to business partners, and also they discuss the importance of authenticity in the delivery of legal services. But Claire starts by asking Ben, what made him become a lawyer in the first place?
Well, in common with lots of lawyers, I did a humanities degree. I was a history student, and I think a lot of people who study history end up going into law. Find that they're better at words and numbers. Some of the things that we do as history students sort of transfer across. So that was an influence. My dad's a lawyer, actually. My brother's a lawyer, so there's a sort of a bit of family footsteps to follow there as well.
So you moved from private practice to be in-house counsel. Can you tell me a little bit about that transition?
Yeah, sure. So I started my legal career working at Crafty Counsel. I was there for about 7 years, and I qualified in the corporate team, so I mainly did sort of M&A and sort of corporate lawyer stuff. And I started to develop an interest in startups and tech, things like that. And I also did an in-house secondment, totally different sector to the government, actually, while I was working private practice. And so sort of drawing those two things together, I'd enjoyed my in-house secondment. I've become quite interested in startup land. And so I started to look outside of the firm and look for a role that sort of combined those things. And I ended up moving to a sort of late stage tech startup called Global Fashion Group, who are a sort of holding company for a bunch of e-commerce fast fashion businesses around the world. I joined them in 2016 as their corporate counsel in London, and trying to sort of bring together the sort of corporate law background with the startup stuff. So that's what prompted the move.
And you've continued on the theme with startups, and you've started up your own company, Crafty Counsel. So perhaps if you could tell me a little bit about what was the thinking behind that.
So I started Crafty Counsel while I was doing my in-house lawyer job. And it's one of those businesses that sort of grew out of the founder's sort of frustration with a few things and wanted to do something slightly differently. So I found that we had a great smallish legal team, and I found that I was constantly wondering, some of the things that we were doing, someone else must have done it before. So what did good look like? And that was across sort of technical legal stuff, but also what I now know is called sort of legal operations, so running a legal department, what systems and processes and technology you use. And also the human side, so just having more connection to other people doing similar things. I still had a pretty strong private practice network, but didn't have that strong a network in other in-house legal teams. So that was some of the backdrop of Crafty Counsel. I thought there should be more of a sort of digital home for in-house lawyers. We're still pretty focused on in-house, but we've broadened out the community a bit. But at that time, I thought there should be really a sort of digital home for in-house, maybe something that feels a little bit like a TED Talks. And on the other side, that can maybe be a way to help law firms and others who want to reach in-house lawyers, to help them with their messaging, with their content, and maybe tell some of their stories in a slightly more engaging way. So that was the thinking behind Crafty. I started it as a sort of side project alongside my sort of in-house counsel day job. And then after a year or so, it got a certain amount of traction. And I thought, well, I may as well try taking the plunge. And that's what I ended up doing to run Crafty Counsel full time.
And you mentioned it found you, and it's taken on a life of its own, which obviously demonstrates the need for it. I'm reflecting on my own time when I was in private practice, and I think lots of law firms will say that they try to provide content in an engaging way to in-house counsel, and they try and I know there are lots of groups that law firms try and get off the ground in terms of in-house lawyers. Why do you think the need was there for Crafty Counsel when so many firms were perhaps trying to get that content and that community together themselves?
I think that some firms have done that really well. I think, to pluck one name out of the air, I think LA Piper have a really strong in-house network with their Win group, and that's really impressive. But I think that one challenge for firms is that inevitably there's a big incentive to try and pull content towards the expertise of that one firm. Ultimately, if a law firm is going to be launching a DC network, it sort of should be something which is working as a part, in some way, part of the marketing funnel for that firm, which makes sense, and that's great. That's a legitimate thing to do, and it adds a lot of value. I thought that there was room for something which was firm agnostic, so something that was more designed, where the starting point was for the in-house community, and we could work with a number of different firms, legal tech, recruiters, other people across the industry, so that it wasn't just one organization that was sort of owning that community and network.
And I know that I know that you've been successful and have a huge community, particularly online. And so firms and in-house are clearly buying into the model. I want to change direction slightly and think about all of the insight that you're obviously gathering through your network, and have a think about 2020, because 2020 has obviously had a huge impact on everyone, both personally and in terms of firms and their delivery. I want to reflect on the positives. What do you think are the keepers from 2020?
It's not a terribly original thing to say, but I think the pandemic has been a big accelerant of a number of pre-existing trends. And so a lot of the stuff that has been happening, we were sort of pointing in that direction already, but it's just happened a lot more quickly. And some of those things are very positive. So things like what we're doing now, so communicating over Zoom, I think that will now have a place, even once sort of IRL, in real life meetings come back. I think legal teams being more confident to use certain technologies, experiment with tech, particularly things like collaboration tools, work within the legal department, with the wider business, also with firms and so on. I think a lot of lawyers have had more confidence and more of a sort of push this year to try those things, and I think some of that will stick. We probably would have got there, but it's happened a lot more quickly. And also some of the soft skills stuff. So actually, to name check DLA again, they published a report recently where they interviewed a bunch of senior in-house counsel. And one of the findings quite interesting was that the people they interviewed, by and large, said pre-COVID, they were more often than not seen as sort of risk managers, contract executor type people. But post-COVID, more were reporting being seen as business partners, people helping to shape the strategy, work out how to get through these times. And that sort of, quote unquote, GC as the business partner concept, that has been talked about for years. And there are whole conferences organized just around that topic. But it seems like, again, some of that has been accelerated, and the way that lawyers and businesses are perceived by their colleagues, and maybe to a degree also they think about themselves, that has changed and matured through this crisis. And so I think that's a good thing. That we've been seeing that, I think, to a degree through our community as well, what we've been hearing from those people. And so I think that hopefully will stick. And again, I think it's positive.
So one of the things that I've noticed is that I think 2020 because of the way that people have to communicate. So, again, now is a good example. We're talking via Zoom, where we don't have to dress up. Lots of the wrapping that was perhaps behind individuals has gone. So they have had to present themselves as themselves, rather than, in a shiny office, or, with a shiny kind of presentation behind them. And that, I think, has given rise to new firms that are doing things slightly differently. Do you think that's going to be something that's a 2020 phenomenon, or do you think that people can now see, actually, we don't perhaps need all of this wrapping, and firms which are 100% remote are just as valid a business model as firms with offices in the city?
I think it's really hard to say. My speculation would be that, yeah, again, I think some of that stuff will stick. I guess my build on that is also, I think you're seeing current circumstances have probably played to strength of some of those new challenges in terms of how they market. So you're seeing some of those sort of remote only or remote first firms. They play very naturally in this sort of digital arena, obviously, and so some of their comms and marketing on social media, for example, has been really noticeable in 2020. One firm who a lot of people have been talking about is Stevenson Law. Their founder, Alice Stevenson, she's this year just carved out this niche that very few have as sort of legitimately an influencer in the legal world, and I think that's super impressive. Would it have happened quite the same way without the pandemics? It's hard to say. Will they sort of have sticking power beyond the pandemic? That example, I would have thought, yeah, they've clearly something there in the market that people have responded really well to, seemingly both clients, but also lawyers wanting to work for those sorts of organizations.
And I think you mentioned challenger firms there, and there are a number I can think of, particularly in the context of legal design. You mentioned Stevenson Law as one that's particularly with social media leverage that to their advantage. And I think they're all kind of selling a similar message, which is we want to do law differently. Which firms for you are doing law differently?
I think a few firms have been doing things quite differently, and I think maybe you can distinguish a little bit between people who maybe they have a slightly different model with their lawyers, and so their marketing is very different, but maybe some of the substance of the way they work is pretty similar to, some firms are, I think, very, very different. So looking at some of the sort of new challenger firms, I think the Law Boutique is a really interesting organization run by Electria Ponis. They are nimble, remote, but also have a big focus on things like design. So bringing in concepts around design into sort of the legal experience. So Electra there, she talks and writes a lot on changing the way that customers experience law. So, for example, that might be in a consumer's experience of the terms and conditions of a tech company's website or app, and making that maybe more almost sort of a positive, so part of that customer experience, rather than something you sort of have to just get through. Again, with that firm, but there are others, experimenting with technology to then deliver services in a slightly different way. So I think those are quite interesting examples where actually I think that's substantively different to the experience of sort of a traditional firm. And then other firms, one that I think is interesting, but it's been around for quite a while now, the Radiant Law run by Alex Hamilton. I think he's been pushing this sort of work in a different way agenda for years. I think that in 2020, maybe it's just that I've got to know them and Alex a bit better during this year. I feel like they've had a bit more attention this year, and stuff like, Alex speaks very openly about use of technology, and also moving away from the billable hour. At Radiant, they don't time recording at all. And so he's been talking a lot about that this year. I think there's a couple of examples for you. Radiant, the Law Boutique, two organizations, I think, doing things in substantively very different ways, where the client experience is different, not just that the marketing is different or the way that the lawyers are contracted is different.
Thank you. And I'm going to change direction slightly again, and I'm going to start thinking about the in-house view, because you mentioned your community is in-house focused. And I think the best place to find out where clients, what do clients want, is the client themselves. So I just wanted to see what insights you've got from the clients, the client side, the in-house side. What appetite has there been for content this year? What are clients looking for from their law firms?
Really interesting question. Someone was actually saying to me yesterday that they'd done some analysis on the amount of content produced by law firms this year. And I can't remember how many thousands of hours it was, or thousands of pages of content. But suffice to say, if you were trying to follow all the content produced by, just say, top 100 UK law firms, they aimed at in-house, you couldn't possibly get across all of it. So there's just sort of, there already was, but I think particularly with COVID, there's just been this wave of content, and a lot also leveraging technologies like this. So using Zoom and things like that to be able to record sort of video snippets or audio snippets. There's a huge amount of content. Finding the good stuff and the relevant stuff, I think, is one of the challenges. Very early on in the pandemic, we did an interview series on sort of top tips for in-house during this time. One of the people we interviewed was a then GC called Nir Golan, who's based in Tel Aviv. He now works for Elevate. He, at the time, said he was just getting bombarded. He felt that he had, those sort of heady spring days, dozens and dozens of client briefings on force majeure. And his message was, please stop sending these. If you value me as a client, pick up the phone and let's, build on the relationship, because now I kind of need that. What I don't need is another briefing on, one specific element of how the firm assumes businesses are being impacted, when actually that's a micro detail in actually scale of which COVID was impacting businesses at the time. I thought that was quite an interesting insight, that a lot of us reach for content, and myself included. We're to a great extent a content business. We sort of reach for content as a thing that we know how to do, but actually there's sometimes a harder bit about are you saying what you're interested in? Are you getting to them at the right time? And also, just, are you listening? And are there different things that you can do to check in and build that relationship with your client, rather than sending them more content in whatever medium that might be?
So Nir appeared on the first series of Lawyers Coach. So for those who want to hear more from Nir, you can check in to lawyercoach.co.uk and hear more for him there. So I know that you've been going out and you've been asking people what are the trends that people need to look out for 2021. Could you tell us what trends caught your attention?
I think it's been really interesting. We've been asking, at the end of 2020, we went out to a number of sort of friends in the Crafty Counsel community to ask what they liked about 2020, because there was some good things, and what their predictions were of the trends. Quite interesting seeing the predictions. Some people are saying actually they're predicting a bunch of firms reverting back to the old ways of working, and that potentially there's going to be quite some tension, as some people want to do that, and some people, maybe on the client side, don't want to do that, and potentially there's some sort of hybrid solution that ends up coming out. Some have been saying more of a focus on sort of substantive legal operations and technology. One person said stopping buying the next shiny new tool, and instead getting more out of what they already have. That seems to be a theme across the predictions, and certainly consistent with a lot of perhaps some of the complaints that we heard during 2020. Too much sort of chasing those shiny baubles, and maybe not enough of just realizing what you've already got and just learning how to use it.
And actually Zoom's a good example of that, isn't it? Because I think, video conferencing has been around for a long time, but, who would have thought we could be using it for, recording a podcast through to a webinar, through to closing a deal?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in theory, you could have done any of those things, but people just wouldn't have, and they weren't.
So what for you, I'm going to ask you the question that you ask your community, what for you has been the big game changer of 2020, and what is your big prediction for 2021?
I hope this doesn't sound too cheesy, but I think there's been a bit more empathy during 2020. I think that people have, I think that there's been realization of the scale of challenges that a lot of people are dealing with at home. I think really it took a while to get there. We went from, in some ways, kind of euphoria of everyone work from home, and then discovering, that works well for some people, doesn't work well for different people. And I think a slow understanding that actually everyone's circumstances are quite different, and that work can be remote and flexible, and we can be more open-minded about those things. But also that needs to be combined with a bit of empathy and understanding that people's circumstances vary. And it won't be easy for everybody, depending on how they're living at home. But I feel that's been a bit of a thread running through the year of a little bit more patience and a little bit more people taking the time to understand that everyone's trying to work their way through this, and it's sort of tricky for everybody. Hopefully that sticks through 2021. It would be a great shame if we see just a snap back to some of the old working practices. That said, I still having so many conversations with people who just say they've been on back-to-back Zoom calls all day. So I think trying to find some way of easing off from that particular way of working, I think will be helpful.
Okay. And the big prediction for 2021?
I don't have a single magic prediction. I think we'll see just continuation of certain trends. So people have been saying for a while with legal tech that there'll be consolidation. I think that's true. We've already seen a bunch of legal tech M&A. We'll probably see a bunch of legal tech companies go bust in 2021. Probably a few of them have been doing things that are a bit too similar. I think there's probably a few companies who have nice solutions, but it's sufficiently distinctive from what else is on the market, or what can't just be repurposed from a nifty use of Google or the Microsoft Office suite. So I think, continuing consolidation on that front within firms, potentially similar. It'd be interesting to see what happens with Deloitte. They obviously acquired Kemp Little towards the back end of 2020. So is that going to mean that they become a real challenger to some of the more established law firms? Hard to say. I think it's just going to be continuation of the trends that we've been seeing in 2020. Overall, probably another trend: more assertive, sophisticated in-house legal teams who are asking more of their firms and who are smarter buyers and better users of technology as well.
Fantastic. We've spoken a lot about the Crafty Counsel community. For those who are listening who want to get involved, can you tell us a little bit more about how they might be able to do that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So if you go to our website, craftycounsel.co.uk, we've got a sign-up sheet on the homepage right there. So you can fill out a form, and we run a bunch of different Zoom sessions each month. So you can tick preferences as to which group seems like you. We run one for the FTSE in-house counsel, one for tech company, startup in-house counsel, and we've got a couple that are mixed groups. So for people who are in-house, people in firms, people who are in legal tech, and we also have a book club, which again is a mix of different people from all walks of legal. So if you're in legal and you want to do things a little bit differently, then we can find a home for you. So just do check it out, craftycounsel.co.uk, and we'll find a home for you in the community.
And it's free.
It's all free.
Which is amazing. Thank you ever so much for your time today. It's been really fascinating talking to you, and I wish you every success for the future.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks so much for having me.
That was Claire Rayson talking to Ben White, the founder of Crafty Counsel. And Claire's with me now. Claire, he made a really intriguing point about maybe 2020 was the year when lawyers transitioned from just being risk managers to becoming true business partners. What do you think to that?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? And I think it's one that perhaps pre-2020, in-house lawyers, some in-house lawyers were probably there anyway. But I think he's right. I think that, lawyers are now, particularly in-house lawyers, so much more than the department that says no. And I think for me, what's interesting about that is how does private practice respond? Because I think, again, 2020 has been the year where we've seen lots of new firms emerge because I think clients want a different type of legal advice. So I wonder how this transition from kind of risk to business partner is going to impact on the way that private practices deliver their services to in-house teams.
And maybe that's what he's doing. He's shining a light on a risk that maybe those private practice firms are falling behind because they're not really close enough to their clients. They're just waiting to be served up the work rather than really truly understanding what's going on, what's motivating, what's worrying their clients on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And I think, the other trend that we saw in 2020, which is one that I'm sure is going to shape the future of law in 2021, is listening. And I think those firms that are truly listening to their clients and going beyond just, what question are you asking me, are going to be the ones that are really going to propel forward this year.
And he used that really good example, didn't he, of how lawyers and law firms were busy inundating their clients during the COVID crisis, almost with the advice that they wanted to give, what the lawyer felt the client needed to know, rather than taking the time to truly understand what the client was truly concerned about.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to Nir Golan, who we spoke to in series 1, where he spoke about the need for lawyers to not just pump out content that's relevant to them, but to provide content that's relevant for the client. And again, something that Ben picks up on there, the need for Crafty Counsel, was because the content that was coming out of lots of private practice firms was biased and slanted towards, where the lawyers could make money, rather than truly perhaps focusing on those areas that the in-house teams wanted to hear.
Practice-centric rather than client-centric.
Absolutely.
Claire, that was a really insightful conversation. Thanks ever so much for taking the time to speak to Ben.
No problem at all.
I do hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Lawyer's Coach. Thanks very much for listening.
Lawyer's Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're enjoying this series, please rate us on your podcast provider so that others can find us. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyer's Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyer's Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.